to the Rest is Politics post-general election special with me, Rory Stewart.
And me, Alastair Campbell.
So, quick explainer for people who've not been up all night like us, and this is us. I think we can now claim we've been up for 26 hours.
Ooh.
I think 26
I had
hours.
a nap.
You had a nap. Well done. Well, very well done. No wonder you look so terrific. Anyway, the results, currently 645 out of the 650 seats have been declared.
Yeah.
Labour currently on 410 seats. They've added 210 seats. Conservatives have lost 249 seats, dropping down to 120. The Lib Dems have gained 63 seats.
I know.
Getting up to 71.
Amazing.
And as you can tell from the difference between 63 and 71, that means they went from 8 seats to 71 seats.
Yeah,
Unbelievable. SNP, other direction, went from minus 38 down to 9. Absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah.
And then there have been some very interesting developments with Independents, Greens, and the Reform Party.
So Independents 6, Reform 4, Green 4.
And this is an extraordinary election. It's extraordinary because it's one of the biggest Labour landslides ever. It is one of the biggest landslides ever. It's also one of the lowest turnouts ever. So a lot of people didn't turn out to vote, whatever that means. Voter apathy, they thought it was all in the bag. A little bit worrying, maybe. An amazing performance for the Greens, who've quadrupled the number of their seats in Parliament. Very strong showing from Reform, which is a new party, which somebody calculated has taken 1 million votes for every seat they've taken. And that's because our electoral system means that they got a lot of votes spread around the country, but they only managed to get 4 seats. In fact, they probably got 50% more votes than the Lib Dems. But the Lib Dems ended up with 71 seats and they ended up with
I know,
with
the Lib Dems who normally complain that the electoral system works against them, in this context has actually worked quite well for them. Look, the big story of the night is a change of government. New Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who I thought spoke really well. I just think it's interesting how, I saw this with Tony Blair. I mean, Tony Blair, people said at the time, had all the charisma and all that stuff. But I noticed when we had won, and people knew that we'd won, people started to look at him in a different way. And I felt that with Keir tonight.
And you felt that he was almost speaking in a different way?
Yeah,
I thought he was
projecting himself more confidently. Now, the truth is, there are going to be massive challenges ahead. First, mini headache, well, big headache for the two people involved, but mini headache for him, is he probably thought he'd just transfer the shadow cabinet to the cabinet. But in this rather strange outcome that we've had, despite a landslide, Labour lost some seats, and 2 of those were belonging to shadow cabinet ministers, so Thangam Debonair and John Ashworth, both gone.
Yeah, partly a story there about the Greens and the rise of the Greens, and partly a story about this new phenomenon that's emerged with these 6 independents, which is the Labour left splitting off. People who are think that he wasn't clear enough in his condemnation of Israel or his support for Gaza, have generated MPs who, in certain cases, have defeated Labour candidates. Some cases came very close. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary who we just interviewed, just won by, I think, about 500 votes.
Yeah.
So Labour will be a little shaken by that, maybe.
Where there is a large Muslim population, Labour were down 20%. And I think you have to put a lot of that down to Gaza. I think of the more dramatic moments of the evening, I think Jess Phillips' acceptance speech after what was clearly a horrible campaign with her opponents, Galloway types, out and about,
shouting at her,
abusing her staff and so forth. And she actually said today, I got quite moved by it. She said that Joe Cox's family were going to go and campaign with her today, and she felt she couldn't take them into that environment. I think the only moment of the night when I literally could not contain my absolute joy was Liz Truss. Because that says to me, if you do a job as badly as she did it, you are going to pay a price, and she's paid a very heavy price.
Well, there's been a lot of people saying the country's had enough of the psychodrama of the Conservatives. So maybe this is the last time we refer to this, but obviously the Conservatives were the really big losers here.
Yeah.
They were in government, and in 2019, it's the last election, they got one of the largest vote shares they'd ever received. got a vote share up in the sort of 43%, and now they've crashed down to about 22%. And in the process, they've lost enormous numbers of cabinet ministers.
11.
And this is, it's almost as many cabinet ministers have been lost since the Second World War in elections have just been lost.
Yeah.
So devastating for them. But it's also reshaped the party. So you talked about Liz Truss. That was very, very dramatic, and maybe we can come back to that, because that was a huge majority, and she seemed as though she couldn't possibly
That was one
lose
of the
it.
safest seats in the country.
Definitely. And
It's now Labour.
would have thought she couldn't possibly lose
Yeah.
it. For me, as somebody who comes from the centre-left of the Conservative Party, I'm a bit troubled, because the cabinet ministers who were very much on the centre-left lost their seats. Alex Chalk, the Lord Chancellor Justice Secretary,
Gillian
Gillian Keegan, both
Lucy
of whom
Fraser.
who we've interviewed on Leading, and also some of the up-and-coming bright young things, Rupert Harrison, Will Tanner, failed to take their seats.
So who's left, do you think, that would make a pitch for the leadership? Badenoch, Braverman,
Yeah, so
Penny Mordaunt's gone.
The right kept their seats. Penny Mordaunt was beginning to pitch herself as more of a sort of one nation candidate. She's gone. So left are Kemi Badenoch. On the left, Tom Tugendhat kept his seat.
Cleverly.
James Cleverly narrowly kept his seat, and Jeremy Hunt, almost miraculously, managed to keep what now seems like a very slim majority, a 7,000 majority, when other people were losing 17,000
It
majorities.
was interesting in the discussion that we had on Channel 4, where Nadine Dorries was kind of ridiculous, but one interesting point I thought she did make, well, 2 points. She said she had no interest in doing any sort of deal with Farage, which I thought was quite interesting. And secondly, she thought that the Conservative Party should go for Jeremy Hunt.
I don't think she thought they should.
She thought they would.
She thought they would.
But that's presumably completely wrong.
Well, so I think it is totally wrong. I mean, because she noticed some of the people on the right lose their seats, like Jacob Rees-Mogg, she has overinterpreted that. But actually, I think if you look at the figures coldly, we now have a Conservative Party that has many more Brexiteers than Remainers, many more supporters of Boris Johnson than opponents of Boris Johnson. And I don't think Jeremy Hunt is going to want this job. I think he will feel that he's been in government a long time.
Do you think he'll be slightly disappointed, given the scale of the defeat that he didn't lose?
I think, to be fair to him...
I mean, he really fought to win.
To be fair to him and Rishi Sunak, they fought hard, didn't they?
Yeah.
But he can't have thought that he was going to hold it. I mean, that was a very slim majority. I mean, so he was up against the Lib Dems, and Gillian Keegan up against the Lib Dems lost the majority of 23,000. He was defending a notional majority of about 7,000. So he can't have thought that he'd make it through the other end.
The other interesting thing in terms of losses, 3 seats that used to be held by prime ministers, Boris Johnson, Henley, Theresa May Maidenhead, David Cameron Whitney, not now the candidates, but all very, very safe seats for the Tories, all gone.
And what does that tell you? What it tells you is that the Remain voting Conservative seats closer to London have been completely alienated by the hard Brexit antics of Boris Johnson and the behaviour of Liz Truss.
Yeah.
And they're the natural centre-right of the party, and they're drifting towards the Lib Dems in large numbers.
Will you finally admit, Rory, that Ed Davey played a blinder in his election strategy?
I'm very reluctant to do that, but I'm certainly happy to say the Lib Dems have played a blinder. And he was the boss. I think, regardless of what I think about him on the water slides, I think where he's been completely vindicated. I had an argument with his chief of strategy about 2 months ago, where I was saying, why are you not talking about the single market more? Why are you not talking about national policy? And he said, we're fighting a local campaign. We're going to win by a very narrow margin, as many local seats as we can.
Tory seats.
And we're not interested in doing these big national campaigns. And boy, did they do it. They squeezed out of a vote share, which has barely moved. They managed to shift up from, whatever it was, 8 up to 70 seats.
Yeah. One of the happiest interviews of the evening was Anna Sarwar. And one of the least happy was Stephen Flynn, the SNP leader in Westminster, not helped by the fact that he looked like he was in a graveyard, standing in front of a big gravestone. But I was surprised the extent of the SNP collapse. I thought they would have held up better.
Yeah. In fact, we should just quickly go through the different nations. So England, Labour has dominated, but the Lib Dems performed well. SNP has been essentially wiped out in Scotland. I mean, they've lost Glasgow. They've been reduced to
Nothing in Edinburgh.
To a rump now. The Conservatives have been completely wiped out in Wales and in Oxfordshire.
Plaid did pretty well.
In inner London.
Yeah.
And then there's been some transformations in Northern Ireland as well. But let's just do Scotland first. So there's going to be, with all these losing parties, Conservatives are going to fight for their souls. Where did we go wrong? Nadine Dorris will say it's because we got rid of Boris and his boisterous energy, and other people will be like, it's because we didn't deliver growth, and Justine Greening will be like, because we didn't get behind aspiration, whatever it is. The SNP is, you can feel them arguing. Some of them are saying, oh, it's nothing personal, it's just an anti-Tory vote. And that's not good enough. No. They're not going to get out of the hole if they just convince themselves it's an anti-Tory vote.
They were caught up with the time for a change mood as well, but they are the government.
And then they're saying, well, it's not really our fault because, we're just devolved government. We're not really responsible for all the stuff that's going on in Scotland. But I felt on the doorsteps, I've been up in Scotland, that there was a very, very strong feeling from people that public services were not working. People hadn't necessarily changed their views on independence. But many people were saying, look, I'm somebody who believes in independence, but honestly, the SNP hasn't delivered on health, hasn't delivered on education. Now, to flip around your challenge to me on, would I admit that Ed Davey strategy of coming off bungees was vindicated? Will you now admit that Keir Starmer's Ming Vase strategy was vindicated?
Absolutely, 100%. I still would like the campaign to have been more dominant of the narrative. It was interesting, some of the polling we saw, that the three most remembered parts of this entire campaign were D-Day, Rishi Sunak coming back early, betting on the date of the election, and Rishi Sunak getting wet on day one. Yeah. Now, Labour having won this election so comprehensively, you'd have thought there'd be something in the top three that was for Labour, but there wasn't. So you have to judge an election campaign, particularly if it's about the opposition. You've got to judge it by the result. And we talked a lot tonight about the efficiency of the vote. Labour did not put too much effort into seats like Keir Starmer's, where he actually had quite a big fall in his support. They put all the effort in the places where they needed to win.
This is often a sign of the master strategist. And I believe, General Kutuzov, the Russian general, would often say, it's all very well, these kind of French with their glamour and their beautiful movements, but all that matters is winning. You just grind them down.
Well, you don't have to make it pretty. That is my view. However, in politics, the winning is the beginning of something that is tougher. And I think that where I think they are going to be in a better position than people maybe think and give them credit for, the size of the majority, I think, gives them a lot of scope to take these issues like growth, planning reform, housing, some of the big things they've talked about. I think they can feel more comfortable now about fleshing out some pretty difficult stuff, and that's what they need to do.
It also looks like it's resolving one of the big conundrums when you're running a campaign, because traditionally it was considered to be very, very important to put things in a manifesto if you wanted to drive them through quickly. And there was reasons for that. And one of them is that the civil service reads your manifesto, and if it's in the manifesto, they prioritize it above everything else. Very easy to get stuff done. But of course, Theresa May lost by trying to reveal her social care policy in her manifesto. Is basically why she lost the election. She didn't actually have a betting scandal. She didn't stand in the rain. She didn't skip D-Day. She lost on policy. And Labour maybe understands that in this modern world, maybe you just have to take the risk of not revealing a policy and then use your big majority to do radical things when you get in.
Yeah. Just briefly on Northern Ireland, I think the big story there is Ian Paisley Jr. losing his seat to Jim Alastair, who's a kind of, so anti everything that we'd been trying to do.
So traditionally the DUP was often perceived as quite obstructionist, quite anti-peace. But
multiply that by several factors, and that's the MP that's now replaced Ian Paisley.
So, and in a sense, this is part of a story we talk about a lot. As the DUP began to compromise, signed up a little bit more to the Good Friday Agreement, suddenly something pops out on their right that's even more extreme.
Yeah, so I think that could be tricky for Hilary Benn, who will, I presume, be the new Northern Ireland Secretary, because that situation is still pretty fragile. I think that was I do think Hilary Benn will really get a grip of that, though, and I know he's been doing an awful lot of work to get on top of the politics of it already.
How now, Alastair, are we going to be presented with the new leading figures in the cabinet? So in 97, did you have a view on, we're going to put Robin Cook out next week and we're going to focus on Gordon Brown this week and David Blunkett's going to come out the week after? I mean, how do you, if you have this team, how do you introduce them to the country? How much of it is about the leader for the first couple of weeks? How much is about pushing the team out so that people can see them?
I think we'll now see more of the team. I think they fought a campaign that was very much about Keir and a very small number of shadow ministers. So, for example, we saw next to nothing of David Lammy in the campaign. We saw next to nothing of Ed Miliband. We saw next to nothing of Ed Cooper. Now, I wonder if that was because they were amongst the small number of people who had actually been ministers before.
Right.
And the message was changed, so they were putting out although no, Pat McFadden was seen fairly high profile.
Right.
But I think what you'll see today, Keir Starmer will speak outside Downing Street, will start to appoint a cabinet, lots of stuff that's already in the diary he's going to have to do, quite a lot of it foreign policy related. And then you'll see the cabinet starting to do stuff. But what we tried to do, we tried to organise everything around the central themes of modernisation. Education was a priority, so Blunkett was out very high profile. Gordon had his big day one surprise on Bank of England independence. That was like a really big thing which set the agenda for quite a while. Harriet, who was there today,
And it is interesting that I still remember it to this day.
Bank of England.
Yeah, just the impact of that, because it felt so exciting, it felt so original, it felt so radical. And it was something that really excited wonks and economists, but it also excited the public. I mean, it felt like, woo.
Now, I don't know whether Labour have anything like that up their sleeves. But what's interesting is that when Gordon announced it, there was no fuss over the fact that nobody had mentioned it during the campaign.
Right.
All that we said in the manifesto was that Labour will endeavour to ensure economic stability and keep interest rates and inflation low. So that was the line in the manifesto that allowed us to say, and here's how.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether that's going to be the approach for Labour.
You deliberately kept it back as a surprise all the way through the campaign.
Yeah.
So you were never tempted to think this could be a moment to get a few more votes in the campaign. You thought, well, we can hold this back and make it our
because I'm not sure it would have been as effective during the campaign as it was in government. The campaign was, was pretty well put together, a bit like Keir's around these very specific pledges. Tony doing a lot of the big picture messaging of modernisation, which for Keir was change. It was very interesting in his speech tonight where he said, we ran as a changed Labour Party, we will govern as a changed Labour Party. Tony literally said the words in his speech, we ran as New Labour, we will govern as New Labour. So there were quite a lot of echoes going on. But no, I think you'll see, and the other thing that happens very quickly is how rapidly people get used to the idea that this is the new government. It's really amazing. And I thought one of the best moments of the evening, slightly ruined by his second speech to the party activists, I thought Rishi Sunak, actually his in Richmond, his acceptance speech for winning the seat, I thought he spoke really well when talking about this seamless, peaceful transition.
Yeah, I thought
it was really, and when you think that it's happening literally overnight.
No, I think that's right. And it's in those moments that I felt some residual pride for the sort of disgraceful mess the Conservative Party. And felt very, again, alienated, I'm afraid, by the way Liz Truss behaved. She turned up late to her count. Didn't give a speech. And, I get extremely annoyed with the sort of pomposity from Jacob Rees-Mogg a lot of the time. And I think his defence of Boris Johnson is kind of incomprehensible. But he knew that he'd lost that Somerset seat.
And he still came and did the interview.
We spoke to him.
Yeah.
2 hours before the result. He already knew the result.
Yeah.
He was courteous. He didn't give anything away. Very straightforward. But he was so cheery that Emily Maitlis actually said to him, well, we can tell from the fact you're doing this interview that you won.
Yeah,
and he said, well, I wouldn't take anything for granted.
Yeah.
Kept a complete sort of poker face all the way through.
And he too congratulated Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
Wish them luck. Jeremy Hunt did the same.
And there was no sort of pompous sort of attempt to launch some grand analysis. He just said, new roots thing. And Jeremy Hunt said, really good luck. I think they're very decent people. I think, Keir Starmer is a very decent person. I think it's a real opportunity. And I agree with him. maybe Labour can do something to reform the NHS, which the Tories couldn't do because the Tories are not trusted enough with the NHS to be radical. Labour maybe could do unpopular things because they've got a bit more trust and space. So as we kind of move towards the end, just to kind of summarise where we are for people who've didn't stay up right the way through the night. Incredible victory for Labour. So Labour's now in a commanding position. 411 seats is sort of beyond imagining. To put it in context, the Conservatives were feeling pretty cheerful under Boris Johnson when they had 365 seats. But Boris Johnson got 365 seats on 43.6% of the vote. Labour has got 411 seats, and they've probably done it on only 33.9% of the vote.
Is that where we are, 33.9?
That's currently what this is showing, 33.9. These figures will change, but at the moment that's what it's showing.
That's pretty low.
Very, very low. Probably the lowest in record that a governing party coming in with such a low vote share. And it's also true that the turnout is one of the lowest on record. So great victory for Labour, great opportunity for Labour, but it's a product of this strange first past the post system. And under the surface, some things to worry about. Why didn't voters turn out and vote in larger numbers? How come these major parties, it feels like the major parties together may have only got 56% of the vote between them. That will be the lowest joint vote share. These parties used to get 90% of the vote between them. So it's a story about new parties emerging. It's a story about the beginnings of the rising of the far-right populists, the reform taking off, scooping up 4 million votes.
Anne Widdecombe winced every time we called it the far-right.
4 million votes. But it's also a story of the Greens popping up, it's a story of the independents. So it's a story of a much more fractured politics. Even if it's not shown in the seats, if you look at the votes in the country, as you pointed out, it's the first time, what was your thing?
That 4 parties have got over 10% and 5 parties have got over 5%. First time ever.
So very, very striking, a sign of a different type of Britain, different type of British politics.
Good. Well, it's been very enjoyable, Rory, spending all night with you in a hot and sweaty studio with the lovely Emily Maitlis and Krishnan Gurumurthy and a carousel of politicians. I was looking at the other channels. I think they got some pretty good guests in there. The rest all looked a bit dull.
I think we did well. We did well. We did sometimes feel when there was sort of 7 people around a table talking for 12 hours, a bit as though I'd entered one of your nightmare French discussion shows.
Do you know what? There is a French programme that I've been on called La Grande Librairie, the great bookshop, and it's just they have this sort of authors exactly around the table that we were at, and they all sort of sit there with these wonderful philosophical statements.
Yeah, and they was asked, presumably, but the question is reform unreformed? Is Labour unlaboured? Is the Conservatives no longer conservative? This is,
And by the way, I wish we'd done more audience interaction, because one of the best bits was the audience interaction when we finally got them to speak.
They were great. Yeah, we should have much more of that.
And they love Keir Starmer.
Next time
they said they're open to loving Keir Starmer.
When we're top TV presenters, and then they said that they didn't really believe he'd be able to achieve much in 5 years. Okay, thank you very much.
See you soon.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.